Hey, Tom, welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad to have you on the other side of this. We had the conversation before where you were interviewing me. I found that really fun, found that really interesting. How's it going on your end?
Good, Rajat. Good to see you again. Thanks for having me here. Excited to chat with you. Excited to talk Bitcoin.
Absolutely, same here. I wanted to ask, I just want to go right into it with my first question. You're a real estate investor, you work in a real estate basically company. What made you start looking into Bitcoin?
I guess it's because of real estate. Like I quit my corporate job in tech to start this business with my brother because I found my income from tech wasn't going to support my family the way I thought I was going to be supported. Like I did all the right things, right? Go to school, get good job. Then I realized, oh, once you buy a house, like I could get a house. I'm an old guy, so I guess I could afford the house. But then I realized, well, I can't really save. This is like I'm trapped. I felt like a debt slave a little bit. And I realized, oh, these rental properties that I'm buying on the side, and started with student rental properties, they are like getting me cash flow and they seem to be going up in value. And I'm gaining more financially from these properties than I really am gaining from my income. And so I quit that to start this real estate brokerage and help Canadians buy rental properties to do the same thing. And then when Bitcoin came out, I kind of looked at Bitcoin and all the characteristics of Bitcoin. I'm like, hold on a second. Bitcoin seems to be quite a bit better in each of the characteristics that made real estate great as a, kind of way to escape the matrix. Bitcoin seems to be better at each of these things. And after initially dismissing Bitcoin, because I didn't realize there was a finite supply. You know how we all go through it, and you just kind of like, oh,
Yeah.
the government will shut it down, and this is some kind of toy. But then when you really study the tech behind it, and you understand the architecture of it, and you realize there's a finite supply, it's more like a commodity than it is, some kind of funny coin. I came to realize that wow, like this thing is really unique. The world's never seen an asset married to a network before. This really is going to help me um, own my time and labor and allow my purchasing power to grow as the fiat world continues to be a clown world and print so much money that these finite units of this Bitcoin seem to be where I want to save my time and labor. So it was
Yeah.
kind of like because of my real estate background, I guess, and the way I was looking at real estate, eventually I was able to figure out Bitcoin.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So in your experience, do you think a lot of people buy houses to just rent to other people? Like you have a brokerage. Have you noticed people are buying more houses over time to rent to other people? Are they buying more houses for themselves? Have you noticed any trends in that?
Yeah, people are buying houses not because they want to. People are buying houses because they're backed into a corner and they want to try to protect their purchasing power.
Hmm.
They see real estate prices going up, at least in nominal terms, and they figure they better grab some because it's the only way they can see financially how to get ahead. So I would say people aren't really buying them to rent them out. People are buying them. We've worked with thousands of investors in Canada now. People are buying them because they feel trapped. They're backed into a corner financially. So they feel forced into buying them. I've yet to meet an investor that we work with that is saying, oh my God, my dream is to become a landlord. My
Hmm.
dream is to rent property. We do have some great investors who really want to produce some great properties to rent to people. There are some that really take a lot of satisfaction in offering a good product to families who need to rent a property. Definitely. But I would say even those people, most of them initially get in because they're forced into it because they don't know how else to get ahead financially. It's like real estate's like their last chance, their last hope, the only thing they have. So in the media, when I see people attacking real estate investors, the kind we work with who look at income and expenses, not speculators. I'd like to define real estate investors into a
Investors,
couple
actual investors, yeah.
actual investors. It's like they feel like they're going into there, the mom and pop investor, the young person who's the investor, they're cornered into it. They're forced into it of a financial system that's basically oppressing them, where the income in Canada and in North America is not going up as fast as the price of hard assets. So they decide, oh, I better get some hard assets for myself. What's the easiest hard asset to get right now in today's fiat financial system? Well, it's rental properties because banks use those properties as collateral. Eventually, over time, I think that's going to change, and Bitcoin will be the pristine collateral that many banks use. But right now, that's the way people kind of are entering that game. And then I think the media, and I think some people blame real estate investors for hogging the supply of real estate, where I don't think that's accurate. I think they're forced into it.
Yeah.
They don't want to be there. And
Hmm.
now with Bitcoin, I feel there's the opportunity for that flow of demand to subside a little bit and people go into Bitcoin. We're finally starting to see some of our investors sell some property
Hmm.
to buy Bitcoin. I don't see any of them yet like disposing of their whole portfolio, but I can tell you that we have seen multiple investors now selling a property or two or three because they want to get some Bitcoin allocation in their portfolio and they want to get it quick. So I do see the reversal of the trend. But Rajat, and cut me off if I'm going too much, there's like a couple categories of real estate that I think unfortunately get lumped together. For me, there's the real estate speculator, the person who's buying a condo to just like flip it, right?
Yeah.
Like they're going to buy a pre-construction condo before it's built, thinking that the price goes up forever. And so they kind of grab onto that and they're just going to flip it. Then there's the investor who's more income and expenses. They're looking at a student rental property or rental property, typically on the suburbs of the great of metropolitan cities, and they're looking at it as a business in a box. They're looking at it as like a rental product to offer to that community. They're backed into buying it. They don't necessarily want to become an investor, but they are looking at it from income and expenses like a business owner. Then there's the developer. And I think Bitcoin is really going to change each of those things quite dramatically. So, for example, the speculators, I think, are going to go away because as people learn about Bitcoin, why would you speculate on a pre construction condo or pre construction house to just flip it when you can really just buy Bitcoin? And the
Yeah.
second category, the investor looking at income and expenses, I think the income and expense real estate is still going to exist. I don't think rental properties are going to go away. There's just a demand for housing. But I do think the premium on the appreciation of these things is going to diminish greatly and they'll be valued again on the income and the expenses. And the appreciation lift of investing in rental properties will likely diminish over time quite substantially, I would imagine. And they're going to go back to the pure utility value, the pure business analysis of that property, where we've kind of lost that. People were buying negative cash flow rental properties because they were just thinking, oh my gosh, the property will go up in price
Hmm.
forever. I'm just going to buy, who cares about the income and expenses? We were laughed at like 10 years ago when people said, just buy pre-construction condos in Toronto, Tom and Nick. That's my brother who I run the business with. That's the way to make real money. And we always looked at the income and the expenses and thought the appreciation lift was just like this bonus that we couldn't bank on, but seemed to be progressing through the 2010 decade specifically. And then the last category would be the developer. And I think development is going to change because I think developers are going to produce better product because as Bitcoin becomes a monetary asset in all our lives, to separate people from their Bitcoin to buy or invest in real estate, you better produce great product or you're not going to get people like me and you to separate ourselves from our Bitcoin to buy that thing. So I think in all these kind of categories of real estate, I think it's all going to be adjusted in different ways. And I think some developers, I don't know if you're familiar with Leon Vankum. Are you familiar with Leon?
No.
Okay, Leon is a real estate developer in Germany, and
Ah, okay.
currently writing a book. He's a Bitcoiner. He is doing some great analysis where he talks about doing development projects that might be 5 or 6 years long, where developers should add about a 10% allocation to that real estate project. And by just allocating a 10% allocation to their real estate project that might be 5 or 6 years long, their compound annual growth rate of that whole project goes from like a 5% compound annual growth rate in his example to like 15% by
Wow.
just adding a 10% allocation to a $10 million real estate project. Instead of investing $10 million in a real estate project, all 10 million, invest 9 million in the project, 1 million in Bitcoin, and you can see your compound annual growth rate triples. And he was doing that with some analysis with historical data back from 2019 to kind of show and prove the point. But as more developers look at that, I think it's going to change that category of real estate quite greatly. So I'm just I'm just going on and on, Rajat. So just
No, that
tell
was
me.
great. I wanted to mention something. I have 2 points to make. So the first thing is, the good thing about this is if you allocate a small portion to Bitcoin, you can improve the quality of your building over time. Because if you want to work on your reputation, and that's the way that you make sales in the internet era. If you have a messed up reputation, anyone can find you. Anyone can make sure that they don't do business with you. Like, let's say, for example, if you screwed over a whole condo's worth 500 families, and they all start complaining to their family and friends, and they start posting on YouTube, your reputation is gone. You're never going to get it back, right? But on the other hand, if you have Bitcoin, let's say, for example, you save 10% in Bitcoin, and then by the time the property actually is close to uh, close to being finished, you could, instead of cheaping out on the upgrades and all the materials that you use, you can use that Bitcoin to increase the value of the inputs. And then the people that you sell to are going to be so much happier. Instead of selling to investors, you're selling to the end user, meaning that those people are actually going to use the property the way that it was intended. They're not just going to rent it out because they want to make cash flow.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second point I wanted to make, so you had three categories there. So the first category was speculators. Second
Yes.
category was the business, and the third
Mhm.
category was developers. So the second category, I have a hard time wrapping my head around why somebody would want to buy real estate to earn cash flow when they could just own Bitcoin and not have to deal with rental income. They don't have to deal with lawyers. They don't have to deal with. I guess it depends on your time horizon. Let's say you're late in you're close to retirement. You're in retirement. Maybe you'd want to buy real estate, but even then, I feel like if you have a 4 year time horizon, you'd probably be better off just holding cash and holding majority in Bitcoin, right? But if you're young and you're buying rental properties to rent out to someone else because you want the cash flow, I think you'd be much better off holding Bitcoin, and then whenever you need to, sell a part of your portfolio to supplement your expenses.
I see no problem with that analysis. I'm agreeing with you. I just think it's an education thing. I think you're so
Yeah.
deep down the rabbit hole. Like I basically tell everyone, listen, if you haven't done 1,000 hours of education on Bitcoin, I'm not really sure what your allocation should be. Like if you're under 100 hours of education on Bitcoin, like maybe hour 0 to 100 in education on Bitcoin gets you to a 10% allocation. And once you're over 1,000 hours, you can go like all in because you understand this thing deeply. But I would say I'm with you, except most people have 0 hours of education or 0 to 10 hours out of
Yeah.
education. So they still look at real estate. Like I had somebody pull me aside at one of our events, which are becoming more and more a mix of real estate and Bitcoin. Like it used to be a 100% real estate event. Then it was like, hey, we're going to tell you about this Bitcoin thing. And it was 90-10. And now at our April event in 2025, it's likely going to be like 50-50, where it's just like
Wow.
50% Bitcoin and 50% real estate. So,
Wow.
but I had someone pull me aside at our last meeting, and it was a father with his daughter. He grabbed me by the arm and he said, "Listen, Tom, can you please stop talking about Bitcoin?" And I said, like, he goes, we like you guys for your real estate analysis and your real estate angle. Don't start talking about this speculative, volatile thing. There's no history to it. Real estate has thousands of years of history. And I said, listen, I need to live in integrity with myself. And if I found something that is going to help us live a life on our terms, which is like our motto, like your life, your terms, um, I need to tell you about it. Like I just can't sleep at night if I found something that is going to be helping you achieve your goals, in my humble opinion, and not tell you about it. So I think when a lot of people go into real estate still, they just have no education around Bitcoin. Like you're so far past where the majority are, like you specifically, Rajat, like
Yeah.
most people just aren't there. So if they have a daughter going to university at Western, they look at the student rental property as like, okay,
Mm.
that's the right move. Our family could use some real estate. We'll buy the student rental. The daughter will live in it. They'll keep it afterwards. And you know what? When it's done right and you buy it properly, that's still going to outpace the debasement that's going on.
Yeah.
And we can all argue about property taxes. And like, I get it. When you have Bitcoin in the analysis, it gets hard to argue against Bitcoin. But it's to me, it's kind of like it's the gateway drug, real estate, to get people to understand central bankers are screwing us all.
Yeah.
And here's the answer. Here's the antidote, Bitcoin. So I still look at real estate as the way to get people understanding the system. But I'm agreeing with you. Like when you just look at the fundamentals of Bitcoin and the characteristics of Bitcoin, open network, permissionless, immutable ledger, global, um, it is hard to argue against it. You can remember the backup words in the seed phrase in your head, travel the world with the Bitcoin just kind of like residing up here. But I
Yeah.
think we're going to go through this evolution where Bitcoiners are banging the table at real estate, and it will pull the monetary value out of real estate. I just think out of all the asset classes, if we were to break out all the $900 trillion in assets around the world globally, I got to think the bond market's going to be
Yeah.
hurt the most. Real estate, I feel like because we all need a roof over our head, it's going to likely diminish in its historical returns. But I still think in nominal terms, in nominal dollar terms, it's likely going to still go up.
Yeah, in terms of dollars, I can completely agree. I think it'll probably actually I think in dollars it'll accelerate if anything because the dollar is going to be debased faster and faster, but that doesn't mean that the real value. I think in terms of Bitcoin though, it'll probably drop a lot. I
Agreed.
actually think we talked
Agreed.
about this in our last we talked about this in our last conversation. I think you're going to be able to buy a house for 1 million satoshis. So it's 0.01 Bitcoin.
What's a million satoshis right now in US or Canadian dollars, roughly? Do you know?
In Canadian dollars, it's about $1,400, $1,400, $1,500.
No.
Yeah,
Wow. And you think you can buy a house for a million satoshis?
yeah. I actually did the calculations. There's 21 million houses or 21 million Bitcoin, but then that Bitcoin has to be used for every single thing in the world, right? You have to use it for cars, you have to use it for houses. I don't think there's going to be debt on the Bitcoin standard. I don't think there's going to be the debt the way that we have it today. There's probably going to be no consumer debt because it's way too risky. So I think that $21 million is what's going to absorb the value of pretty much everything. So because of that, if we have, let's say, 10% of the houses in Canada is uh, something like 2-3 million houses, 1.12 million houses. I think there's probably like 30, 20 to 15 to 20 million houses in Canada. What do you say?
I don't know that stat, but sure, let's
Yeah,
go with it.
maybe less than that. Maybe let's say yeah, maybe 15 to 20. Okay. So the way that I see it, in the entire world, there are 2.5 billion houses. And there are probably places that people want to go more than Canada, right? So let's say if you could get a house for 1 Bitcoin in Canada versus like 0.2 Bitcoin in Thailand, and you can get a mansion and you can get a beachfront property, why would anyone want to move to Canada,
Yeah.
right?
And you
And I
can,
think,
yeah, you might be right. It's blowing
right?
my mind to hear that number, but yes, hard to
Yeah,
argue. And you
it's
can
already at
move,
4.
yeah, agreed. And you can move the monetary units, the Bitcoin globally quite easily.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine moving Canadian dollars out of the country now? Like Bitcoin is going to present a lot of opportunities.
It takes you weeks,
Weeks, and you
days.
have to beg.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. It's going to be a wild world. So what's your thought then? So you don't think there's going to be any debt because it'll just be too risky measured against Bitcoin? Why would you take on the debt? Because the debt would be denominated in your example in Bitcoin,
Yeah. I
in
think there
SAT.
will be debt. I think there will be debt, but for businesses. So in exchange for maybe equity.
Mm,
Um, I'm not sure if you know. So I took a class on Islamic finance in my university, and it
okay.
wasn't about the religious aspect. It's just interesting the way that it's thought of. So in Islamic finance, they don't like interest, right? In this system, I think banks won't like interest because it won't make any sense to them. Like let's say if they want to lend Bitcoin to someone and they're going to get 10% interest, but then the chances are that this consumer might default on the debt and they have no way to pay you back if the supply of money isn't being debased. If there's not more money being created and added to the system, how are they going to pay you back unless maybe they make more money? But then it gets more and more difficult to make more Bitcoin over time. So I think because of this, let's say for banks, it won't be worth it. There's too much
So
risk.
okay. Let me ask you this then. We can stick on the Canadian banks or banks in North America or in the
Hmm.
West, however you want to discuss it. The current base of the financial system to me is bonds,
Yeah.
treasury, US treasuries. What happens to the entire Western banking system over the next few years? I was having this debate with my brother, and my kind of hot take on the subject was I think they're in trouble. I
Yeah.
don't think that I think they're run by committees and bureaucracies that aren't going to move as fast as technology is moving, and Bitcoin is going to catch them off guard, and their whole business case is going to kind of just demolish right in front of our eyes rather quickly. Um, but I do consider that like a hot take. Like I'm not banking my future on that. But if I look at the telcos in Canada, like I remember when the telcos, Bell, for example, was making all its money with landlines. And if it wasn't for mobile and the iPhone and the selling of data, those telcos would probably completely be out of business. So now with banks being threatened by this technology, I just don't know how they survive.
Yeah.
What's your latest thinking on that? I'm not sure if I've heard that from you.
The way that I see it, if banks are going to reject Bitcoin, that's like Bell rejecting the internet,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you can't. If you're a business, you have to go where the customer is going. You can't just stick to your own beliefs, right? Let's say, for example, if all of your clients they wanted single family homes and all you want to push is condos, you're going to go out of business,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think the world is going to go to a Bitcoin standard. I mean, I don't think that's something that anybody can stop. I think that's partly why the U.S. government wants to accumulate as much Bitcoin as they can as quickly as they possibly can, right? Because the world is going to a Bitcoin standard, at least in my opinion, the way that I see it. I think there's no way to avoid it, right? Why? Let's think of it this way: if you were an oil producing country and you had a choice between accepting Bitcoin versus accepting pieces of paper, which one would you accept?
Sure.
Right? I mean, it's just when you go through
So you
that
think
way
the
of
banks
thinking,
will you think the banks will adapt? They'll
I
change
think
to
they'll be
you.
forced to, or
Mhm.
either they'll be forced to, or companies like MicroStrategy are just going to take over everything. At least that's how I see it,
That's how I see it as well.
right?
I think they're going to be forced to. They won't be able to react fast enough because they're run by committees and boards that are just too old, and they're going to think they're right, and their ego is going to be too large to see the Bitcoin future. And I think companies like MicroStrategy, maybe Cantor Fitzgerald, which I'm hearing more and more about. I think the founder or the CEO or chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald is currently the nominee for the Secretary of Commerce in the
Yes.
U.S. Um, I just think these new, like quote unquote, new banks will arise, and maybe some of the biggest ones will change fast enough because they'll have a lot of pull. But I can see a world in some of the Canadian banks just not being able to adapt. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just think that some of the Canadian banks are not going to change, and they're just gonna go away. I know that sounds
Yeah.
crazy.
I completely agree with you. You were saying that that's a hot take, but I agree with you. I actually think
Mhm.
that that's true. I think that's where the world is going, right? It's like if Amazon had stuck to being just a bookstore and they said, "Oh, e-commerce is nothing," where are they going to be?
Mhm.
Right? It's almost like a brand new reset. Anyone can take advantage of this. Anyone can use this to their advantage. Let's say, for example, let's say there's random people who were really early and they actually had the conviction and they bought 10,000 Bitcoin or 100,000 Bitcoin. They could start a bank. That's direct competition for TD Canada Trust, right? For BMO, for CIBC. If BMO, CIBC never get 1,000 or 100,000 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, they have no power left. I think money. I think that's what Bitcoin does. It separates the banks because banks have the power to create money out of thin air. So they literally own us, right? They can pay us for our labor,
Mhm.
for our time, for our energy, for our effort,
It's such a scam. It's such a
right?
scam. You and
And
I work for money. They
yeah,
print it. Like
exactly,
that's it's mind-boggling.
right. And then that gives them all of the power over us.
Hmm.
And then on this Bitcoin standard, if somebody like for example, I started buying Bitcoin in 2022, 2023, to somebody in 2020, 2040, for example, they're gonna be like, how the hell were you so early? But today people are thinking, oh, this guy's new. He knows nothing. He doesn't understand this thing. But then there's people who bought in 2009, 2010, 2011. Maybe they have 100,000 Bitcoin in multiple wallets around the world. right? And now they can, like I said, they could be direct competition to these massive multinational mega corporations, and those mega corporations are never going to catch up because this person was earlier than them.
What do you think of the U.S. and the Bitcoin, a potential Bitcoin strategic reserve of some sort? Do you think it's going to be more like a, a stockpile where they're like, okay, there is some value in this thing. Let's just any we confiscate through any means in the government that we have, we're going to keep, and maybe we'll add to it? Or do you think it will literally be something that is more strategic in that they'll say, listen, we have a target and a plan to acquire this much Bitcoin this year and next year. And this is going to be an ongoing effort because we see the value of this thing going forward. So will it be more like a casual thing? Because I think in some form of this, it's going to happen. If you read between the lines on everything Trump is saying, Eric Trump spoke in the UAE recently,
Yeah,
seemed to indicate that this was going to
million
be the
dollar
case.
Bitcoin.
Do you think it'll be more like a casual kind of official stockpile that they just kind of keep on the side, or will it really be a more strategic effort? What do you think?
I think this is going to be well thought out, and it's going to be strategic to
Hmm.
the point. I mean, at the end of the day, I think if the U.S. works efficiently, they're probably the best country to carry out something like this, right? Canada seems like we're never gonna catch
Useless.
on.
We
So
even
I
sold our
think,
gold. We can make fun of gold,
yeah,
but like we shouldn't have sold our gold. We even
right,
sold our gold.
right, exactly. We sold it for pieces of paper, like that. That's how incompetent we are. And when Pierre Poilievre was saying that Bitcoin, I think near the bottom, or no, actually near the last top, he was talking
Yeah.
about Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? I think
Yeah.
that's when it was,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
he was getting a lot of hate, a lot of pushback, right? And I think maybe when he come if he gets elected at some point, maybe he'll turn Canada around. But I think the U.S. is probably in the best position for this. Like they can print money first of all. They can borrow as much money as they want to. They can do it under the table,
Hmm.
right? They don't need to tell anybody. Whenever they need to put out the information, I mean, they could. As much as people think that the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government are separate, they're not.
So then, okay, and that's interesting because they already have the most gold in the world of any country. The eurozone has more gold as a group, but the U.S. holds more gold than any other country in the world, and they currently market to the old price of the 1930s at like $35 an ounce or whatever it is. If you look at the U.S. balance sheet, they
Yeah.
literally mark
Oh,
the price of their gold to $35 an ounce.
I think it's like
They
$44 an ounce or something. I
40,
read
okay,
something.
but it's
Whatever the
not to
number.
the
It's very low compared to
it's
where it is
not
today.
mark to market.
Yeah.
And so they have that. So then if they start acquiring some Bitcoin as well, it's interesting because they can then print a lot of dollars, devalue their currency, inflate the economy so their debt to GDP ratio looks better. They also
Yeah.
kind of attack their enemies by decreasing the value of the US treasuries that these countries have, while themselves having the biggest stockpile of gold and building the biggest stockpile of Bitcoin. So
Yeah.
like it does kind of like answer a lot of their problems by building a strategic reserve in a lot of ways. It would decimate the purchasing power of the US individual as they inflate the currencies, those who don't jump on the Bitcoin bandwagon.
Yeah.
Um, but as a sovereign nation, it does solve some of their problems. So there is like a pro con to this,
Yeah.
but as the country as a whole, it does kind of solve a lot of issues.
But I mean, what about the flip side of this where China owns something like $1 trillion worth of US national debt? What if they start dumping and they devalue the dollar before the US dollar before the US government can get to it overnight? Let's say for example right now there's a shakeout and people are selling, and at some point some country comes out and says we're going to buy every single Bitcoin on every single exchange that's on sale, and we don't care how much we have to pay for it. Even the
You know
U.S.
what's
I mean,
interesting?
for all we know, the U.S. government could do this, right? They could just screw everybody over, and they could tell everybody that we're going to do it on.
You know what's interesting about what you just said is that when you said if what if China dumps all their treasuries, and I thought to myself, okay, at that level, it's war. Like it's
Yeah,
literally war. The U.S. threatens them with outright war. The beautiful thing to me about Bitcoin and what you just said is that to accumulate Bitcoin, you have to get access to energy in the most efficient way possible to
yeah,
mine Bitcoin or do something else to generate value to be able to buy the Bitcoin. And Bitcoin kind of flips the world on its head in that now we're not talking about kinetic war, to use some of Jason Lowery's kind of thesis. We're literally talking about a world where everybody's scrambling to produce energy at the lowest cost possible to be able to mine as much Bitcoin as they can and acquire much Bitcoin as they can. And it just changes the world in a really beautiful way. So it's kind of like there's a few years of volatility ahead of us and how this all gets sorted. But beyond that, it kind of removes the need for kinetic war, because
Yeah.
now it's just who can mine the Bitcoin, um, and who can produce energy in the most abundant way possible. And any surplus energy is kind of absorbed into the economy. So there's the possibilities where we just get more energy at a cheaper rate than we ever had as well. So like we're
Yeah.
kind of headed toward this really cool abundant world where I guess a couple things like AI and Bitcoin together are now pushing individuals and corporations to generate more and more energy. And then the free market kicks in to try to create that energy in the cheapest way possible. And that energy kind of flows out into the communities that are around it. So the future is rather interesting in this regard. Like it's
Yeah.
really going to change for the better.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely have. You looked into the energy side of things? Like, let's say, for example, the UAE. A lot of countries in the Middle East, um, they produce oil. Why would they
Mm-hmm.
sell their oil at cheaper? I saw this from Gary Cardone. Why would they sell their oil for cheap when they could sell it to the Bitcoin network and get Bitcoin out of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It
Right?
doesn't make any sense. The angle I've looked at it mostly from
Hmm.
has been because I used to work in tech at Oracle. Whenever Oracle makes a move, I still kind of pay attention. And Larry Ellison, I think he's 80 years old now, worth like I think it's like 120, 130 billion dollars or whatever. But Oracle made an announcement that they were going to build a data center, and they made a nuclear investment. I believe their first investment. Don't hold me to this. I think it was around $100 billion, where they're
Wow.
going to develop some nuclear facilities. I believe it was in the Ohio area, and they're going to build data centers right next to it.
Wow.
And I thought, oh my gosh, the reason that they can do this is because, you know, their data center, they need these data centers as AI and technology keeps growing and evolving. But before, if you produced excess energy that your own needs couldn't absorb or the community around you couldn't absorb, it was kind of wasted. You had to kind of desperately sell it to like neighboring communities around you and feed it into the grid. Otherwise, you were just overbuilding your supply, and it was this kind of cat and mouse thing on how much energy to create. But now with Bitcoin miners, a company like Oracle, and they didn't kind of lay this out, but I thought, oh, it kind of makes sense now. They can build massive facilities to generate energy, feed their data centers, and the community will get the benefit of this energy as well, because I'm sure they'll sell it into the community, all this energy. It will likely drive energy prices down. And then if the
Yeah.
data centers and the community can't absorb all the energy that's produced because they're building such big facilities, well, now they can turn Bitcoin miners on and monetize that extra energy with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is creating this new opportunity for a future of abundant energy for all of us. And I
Huge.
think it's huge. And I think that goes to Jeff Booth's thesis of the price of tomorrow, why deflation is the key to abundant future. And I'm sure you're familiar with Jeff. And I could never wrap my head around the idea that energy would get cheaper. Like I
Hmm.
always thought, no, like energy is going to get cheaper. That one's difficult. But then when I saw these tech companies, and now Meta with Mark Zuckerberg has made that move. Microsoft made a big announcement of some nuclear investments. I just thought, oh my gosh, like this is going to happen. This is going to be driven by the big tech giants who
Yeah.
want a ton of energy. And because they're going to be pushing all these energy needs, we're going to get cheaper energy in the long run. And Bitcoin is going to make the math work. Whereas before, building an oversupply of energy, you can never monetize that extra supply. So it kind of limited the amount of energy that was created in different areas, and that's going to go away.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm not the expert in this area, Rajat, but just kind of
Yeah.
going through that in my mind, I'm like, this looks rather interesting, and now I can see where we get an abundant future of energy
Yeah.
at
I'm
a
gonna have to
cheap
take some
price
time
per.
processing that because I feel like that just like it changes your entire worldview. right? Because right now,
Yes.
think about
Yeah.
how think about how many people can't survive because they don't have enough energy. Because of Bitcoin, energy can be produced anywhere. That's huge.
And when Jeff says, he'll always repeat this line where he says, the marginal cost of production
Mm,
ultimately falls to zero. I can never wrap my head around it when it came to energy. And then through thinking this out and seeing these tech companies do this, I thought, oh my gosh,
nuclear,
yeah, like
because
these
nuclear is
tech
cheap.
comp, yeah, and these tech companies, it's not even going to be the governments. It's literally these tech companies that are like, we're talking about Oracle starting with their initial investment in this space, or Jat, their initial
$100 billion.
investment, $100 billion. That's their
That's
first
insane.
investment. So if that's where we are headed, I was thinking, like, in the next 5, 6, 10 years, like, what the heck happens to this if that's the beginning of it? Like, I remember the day, like, as by way of example, and this is a small example, but when you look at when tech first started and email first came out, companies needed to build server rooms. Like, every company that you would go into, they would have their server room. You would literally, as a tech person, you would walk into a medium or large size company and you say, hey, where's your computer server room? And in there would all be the
Hmm.
computer geeks in there. And then you'd be running the email servers for that corporation would be in there. And you would have Microsoft Outlook servers, and they cost like $1 million to license them, and then you had to keep them up all the time, and you had to prevent them from attacks and do all this thing. Then by like when I started this business with my brother, Rockstar Real Estate, when we left to start this business, we were pitched Microsoft Outlook servers. And instead of paying like tens of thousands of dollars in licensing fees and annual upkeep, we just went to Gmail.
Hmm.
And like Gmail was like, we didn't need any servers. We didn't need a server room. We didn't need to hire any tech people to run the email servers. And for the first few years, I think for like a decade, it was free. So like you went from a world where email was like super expensive, and then almost overnight, it was free. And I
Yeah.
remember talking to a friend of mine who started his own business who was still going down the Microsoft Outlook path. And he thought, I don't understand how you're getting this email for free. Like, I'm paying all this money. And I'm like, oh, well, I just changed to this web based new paradigm that came out. And that was a result of technology. And I think technology is going to do the same thing to energy, where it was like really expensive for us to get energy. And I think the price of energy is going to come down, and we're just not prepared for that world.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to switch gears with you. Sorry, I feel like I'm hogging the conversation, but I'm
Oh
really
no,
curious in your
that's
take.
great.
So on the real estate stuff that I spoke of, like there's speculative real estate, condos, people who are flipping homes,
Yeah.
renovating, flipping them and trying to make more money and that kind of stuff. Then there's like the actual rental properties, which I call more like a business in a box, like a little franchise. And then there's development projects. Out of those three categories, you asked me a question about rental properties, and you said, like, what do you think about this? What do you think is going to happen to you? Like, what's your opinion on that category, or the speculative or development projects? Like, how are you thinking this through? Do you just think they all kind of lose the monetary premium at the same time? Do you think it happens at different stages? I'm
I
curious into your take.
The way that I see it, developers are probably going to do well no matter what because they're creating actual value, right? They're adding value to the market, and if there's somebody who wants to buy a house, they'll be able to sell it to them. But then there could also be the flip side of it where I think in Canada there's like 10% of the supply of real estate is unoccupied, and as well as the US, about 10%. So what happens if the people who own those properties um, own them just as a store of value and they start selling?
Mm-hmm.
Because the price is determined at the margin, right? If 10% of the houses on a street went on sale, the price is going to drop pretty quick because people are going to start thinking, oh, I'm not going to be able to sell my house. There's going to be wars, basically the opposite of bidding wars, right? There's going to be a war to bring the price down,
Yeah, to
right?
get out.
And
Yeah.
we saw that during COVID, like when when during 2020 2021, I saw condos down in downtown Toronto for 400K.
Mm.
That's insane. Within a year of that, they were back up to like 700. And now they're coming back down to like 500, 550. Those same condos. But because of the price being determined at the margin, people who freak out, that this is the retail mindset, right? If people freak out and they start selling, and then interest rates seem to be just keep rising, they keep rising. Rates were at what? 2% not too long ago. Now they're at
Mhm.
5. What are the rates right now? 5, 6%?
Now they've come down, so you can get like a 3-year for like 4.1%. 3-year
4.1.
mortgage,
What
4.
about a
Most
5 year?
people are getting a 3-year, 5 a
Yeah.
bit higher, like you can 4.6, 4.8. Most people are grabbing 3 years right now at 4.1 or so.
So do you think that the Bank of Canada might increase rates if the Canadian dollar gets too weak?
Yeah, what a great question. It's a complicated answer, but no, because I think as Trump comes into power, he's going to weaken the US dollar aggressively, almost out of
Hmm.
need, because they can't keep a strong dollar. And then I think you're just in a currency war, whereas the US dollar weakens. So Canada looks relatively a bit better than we are
Hmm.
today. And it kind of gives the cover to the Bank of Canada to cut rates again. I think the U.S. really wants to grow their economy when they have their debt to GDP ratio is like 120% or whatever it is today. So like,
Yeah.
if you have that kind of debt to GDP ratio to keep rates at this level, you're just sucking dollars out of the system. Every dollar of debt that's paid off is a dollar extinguished out of the system. And
Yeah.
when you have more debt than GDP, that just will collapse the system eventually. So I think they're going. My gut tells me they're going to cheapen their dollar as Trump gets into power.
Hmm.
That Jerome Powell's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He cut rates a little bit as we're recording this, I think earlier this week, and has said he might not cut in the future. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think they're going to continue to cut, or they will drain the Treasury General account in the US and just flush the economy with money that's sitting in the Treasury General account right now, and weaken that. And then the Bank of Canada will, be allowed to cut rates further. And it
Hmm.
might look like it's not too bad. Like it might even look at the same rate as the exchange rate right now, but the price of assets will be, the nominal price of assets, and your groceries, my groceries will be higher, rent will be higher, house prices will be higher. Um, that's what I think. This is just a race to the bottom in currencies, and they're both just stair stepping at different intervals to try to hide what's really going on.
Yeah.
It's just
I
the
think what could happen with that. So back to the real estate question, I think that was a great addition to what I was saying. So I think if that happens, all roads lead to Bitcoin. If interest rates keep going down, the US dollar gets weaker, the Canadian dollar gets weaker, people want to leave it, but then they see that the faster race isn't real estate, it's Bitcoin. So they want to buy Bitcoin. And then there's going to be tons of people who own rental properties. This is the way that I see it. They own rental properties, and they're going to see that they don't need to be managing these rental properties anymore. They can just own real estate. So the way that I
agreed.
see it, I mean, people are going to start selling their rental properties over time. Even you've experienced it. You said it yourself. They haven't
Mhm.
done their whole property portfolio, but they're still selling part of it. I don't think most people will sell their entire portfolio. Even if they sell, let's say 1, 2, 3, 5 properties out
Oh,
of
it's
their 100,
meaningful. That's meaningful. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Five
Yes.
properties go on the market. That's
Yes. Yeah.
huge, right? And
Yeah.
then
So that's it. That's it. Because I'm agreeing with you. So then let's just play it out. Like, what does Canada do? So, like, the whole banking system, the best collateral to the banks have been property. So, like,
yeah,
in this example, which I'm agreeing with you on, like, I gotta then just think it spirals even faster, because then, like, the Bank of Canada and the government's going to say, whoa, 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 we can't have this happening. So we will come out with some, Canadians, we can't cut rates anymore, but everybody deserves a home in the name of fairness. So we're coming out with the Everybody Deserves a Home Canadian program. 80-year amortization is now approved. Interest rates can stay exactly where they are today.
yeah,
And at an 80-year amortization, it's not called an 80-year amortization. It's
whatever. Yeah,
called
yeah,
fairness of housing. Canadians are the best
yeah, yeah,
program.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You will be in debt
Yeah.
forever. You will be in
Support
debt
the Banks
forever.
Act.
I shouldn't laugh because this is horrible. But
Yeah,
yes, with the bank's help, you will be in debt forever. And they just support the market through like programs that we can't even conceive of right now. Because I just
yeah.
can't see how they let real estate prices tumble.
I don't think they have
Like,
a choice.
mhm.
I think the better outcome for them would be to actually take this in stride, to act like, okay, yeah,
Oof.
we were
I
supporting this all
agree with
along,
you. I agree with you.
right?
But
Because they
yeah,
don't want to look stupid, right? The goal isn't to look dumb in front of people, to admit that you were wrong all along. The goal is to make sure that you get reelected. So
yeah.
if anything, maybe they'll start funding 3D printing companies for building more houses. Maybe they'll
Yeah.
start funding more developers. Maybe,
Yes,
right?
I want to believe it. I want to believe it, but I just thinking you're a politician in, let's say, east side of Toronto. House prices start coming down because people are selling. Some people who had rental properties start selling. Prices set on the margin. Prices start coming down. Your constituents are going to be at your throat to
Yeah,
do something. Like I can't see how the politician says, "Hey, this is in your best interest. We must suffer as a community and allow this to play out so that we can get to a better, brighter future," which I think is ultimately what you're saying. I
yeah,
think I'm a more of a skeptic in that the only reason I think prices continue to go up forever in the real estate market in medium and long term, short term, it could definitely
yeah, yeah.
100% fluctuate, is that the politicians just won't have the backbone to stand up against their constituents who will scream and wave their fists at them saying, you
Yeah.
got to do something.
But
But
I think at a
you
point,
think they could?
there's going to be more people who can't afford houses than the people who can, right? Because over time, it's just if you think about it, younger generations can't afford to buy houses, and the ones who do are a lot of them are over leveraged and they can't pay back their mortgage, so they lose their house and it goes to a bank. Then the bank sells it to some real estate investor that they know about. So more and more properties are being held by a smaller group of people. So are these politicians going to cater to the small group of people or the people who could riot and completely destroy everything?
Okay, I see your
Right.
point. So
I
when
mean, I
that
don't know.
group, yeah,
It
when
could,
that
I could be wrong.
group.
Yeah.
No, no, I see your point. When that group becomes the majority, it could just be our context. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 32.
You're 32. I'm 50. I'm turning 52 shortly.
Hmm.
Could be our context because from your context, few people own property. So the majority could uprise and demand that from the politicians. The politicians could be younger. They could be more and more millennials will become politicians. From my context, at the people around me at my age, I'm Gen X. Um, enough of them have real estate. So I think the majority still is holding property and the politicians won't allow it. Huh. Yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It's an
And
interesting time. There's a transition
it,
there. And it
yeah.
might, I don't know when that happens, but when the millennials kind of like, quote unquote, rise up and
Yeah.
demand that from a millennial politician, then I can see what you're talking about. So,
Yeah. Millennials, Gen Z. I mean, like, if let's say, for example,
oh yeah,
over
Gen Z.
time,
Well, Gen Z has the benefit of their growing up with Bitcoin. Just
right?
buy,
Even
let's
millennials,
just tell
right?
all Gen Z, buy Bitcoin, buy
That's it,
Bitcoin.
right? That's the thing, right? So over time, let's say over the next 20 years, there's going to be politicians who are millennials and Gen
Yeah.
Z.
Mhm.
They're
Yeah.
going to
Over
have
that time frame, I see it. Yeah. Yeah.
grown up with Bitcoin. So eventually, like it's all roads lead to Bitcoin.
Mhm. They really do.
Either people do it now, they rip the band-aid off, or later
Mhm.
on, let's say for example, some Gen Z or millennial gets in office and then they increase property taxes. They increase capital gains taxes.
Yeah.
They get rid of tax benefits for real estate investors.
Yeah.
Nobody can rule these out. Nobody can
No.
stop this from
No.
happening,
No.
right? If somebody's crazy enough to go into office and just screw over the people who own houses, I mean, you can't stop them from doing that. And then they've grown up with Bitcoin and they see where Bitcoin is going and they completely understand what it is,
Mhm.
right?
Okay, I have a question for you. The next
Yeah.
time somebody pulls me by the arm and says, "Hey, Tom, stop talking about this Bitcoin thing. Focus on the real estate." From your context, how should I answer?
I would say, I mean, the way that I see it, I think what you said was right. You're not selfish. You don't want to be, if you can give somebody the power to take control of their life, then why wouldn't you? Right. That's part of the reason
Mhm.
why I post about Bitcoin. I used to be a real estate agent. I don't know if you remember this, but I
Yeah, I
used to be a
remember. I
realtor,
remember.
right?
Yeah.
And I was making great money from that. I was making well above the average or the median wage in Canada. So I was doing pretty well. I moved over to Bitcoin. I'm making less money from this, but the thing is that it's the way that we see the world, right? Do you want to build a reputation
Mhm.
where you offer products to people to make money and then over time they get screwed over? Or do you want to build a reputation of offering something to people that you know will do well over time and you know the world is changing regardless of how much money you make from it? I know a lot of financial advisors will always tell you, oh, buy stocks, buy real estate, buy bonds, because that's what they've grown up with, because
Mhm.
that's how they make money. right? I used to work in finance.
I remember.
I was working on a bond desk, and I had years of experience in doing that. I did the CFA. I mean, the CFA Institute came after me.
You
I'm
almost
not
started
talking about
laughing when you said that. Yes.
right, right, and that's the thing. So when you think of it from that perspective, some people are going to be they're going to have integrity and they're going to offer you the best solution for your life, while other people aren't. Maybe those other people, maybe they're not malicious in intent, but maybe they just don't understand what it is. I mean, the best thing that somebody can do for themselves is to study it for themselves, right? So if
Hmm.
somebody tells you, "Oh, uh, don't talk about Bitcoin, talk about real estate," tell them to study Bitcoin. I mean, if anything, what you could do is you could give them a copy of the Bitcoin Standard.
Funny you say that. I used to, I've been in Bitcoin for a bit now. I used to, and I still do, have copies of the Bitcoin Standard in our office here.
Hmm.
And as some clients that I thought were open minded enough, I would slip them that book and I would say, just
Mm.
read the first 4 chapters, 72 pages. That's all it is. It's been a while since I said this, but there's a paragraph at the top of page 31 or page 34. I think it's page 34.
Wow.
And it basically says, like, you can dismiss it, but you can't dismiss money that is harder than yours. That's
Yeah.
what safety or something like
Exactly.
that. That little paragraph, I think it's at the top of page 34 in the new
Yeah.
edition, if that's still the same page. And I remember reading that paragraph being shocked, like, oh my God, like you can dismiss Bitcoin. I wish I had the language right in front of me, but you can dismiss Bitcoin. But you can't dismiss money that is harder than yours
Yeah.
because the purchasing power ultimately flows to that money. And I literally
Yeah.
remember staring at that page on the book going, oh my God, like, oh my God, I need to
Yeah.
get some of this stuff. And I'm sure just like you, when you first kind of go into it and you get a little bit of Bitcoin, you're like, okay, I'm good. I got a little bit
Yeah.
of Bitcoin. I'm good. And then you learn more and you're like, I need more of this
That's it.
stuff. I
I
need
think the
more.
first I think the first 100 hours are probably going to confuse people more, if
Yes,
anything,
yes.
because it's going to make them
Agreed.
ask more, especially if they're analytical, if they're actually paying attention to what they're learning. For me, at least, reading the Bitcoin Standard made me ask more questions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's what made me dive a little bit deeper into Bitcoin. I actually think there could be another answer that you can give somebody if they ask you um, to stop talking about Bitcoin. Show them this chart. I don't know if you've seen this before, but this is the priced in Bitcoin 21 chart where it
That
shows you
one, I
the
don't think I
price of
have.
a house in the US in
So
terms of
good.
Bitcoin versus in terms of dollars. So in terms of dollars, the price has doubled. But in terms of Bitcoin, it's down 99.9%.
Jeez.
And
It,
just showing them this chart, it blows people's minds, right? I try to use this as much as I can. I try to show it to as many people as I can because, I mean, it's kind of scary to look at. It's going
it's fun.
straight down.
It's funny when you do that though, because then as soon as you start using Bitcoin as a unit of account for your own life, like I know when our family had to get a new car last year, and I started thinking about it in Bitcoin terms, and I realized it was going down and down in Bitcoin terms every year. This car, I thought, oh my gosh, why am I going to like? Why would I separate myself from some Bitcoin to buy the car? I don't
Yeah.
want to sell the Bitcoin. I'll freaking lease the car. Like,
Yeah.
give me some of this fiat debt to lease the car instead of buying the car. And at that point, I guess that was about a year ago. I think Bitcoin a year ago, I forget, maybe it was around 30K or 40K or something like that. And
Yeah.
Bitcoin's right now like high 90s or wherever we're at today, 100, let's just call it 100 even or whatever, bouncing around. Um, and that was just a great move. you know,
Yeah.
to not separate myself from that because the car is getting cheaper in Bitcoin terms. And I think that's the transition. Like once you have, like when you buy $100 of Bitcoin and then you can start looking at the price, but as you save in it over time, if it literally becomes your savings account and you're steady saving and you're saving, you start to look at it and you realize that the purchasing power of this savings just goes up and up and up. And when you have that transition, that's the moment to me anyway that I thought, holy smokes, like this is the best savings technology that humankind has ever seen.
Yeah. Have you considered when people say to you, "Oh, I need the cash flow for my rental properties. Bitcoin doesn't offer cash flow." What would you say to that? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I get that a lot, and I get like just yield. I invest for yield, Tom. Like I don't know what you're talking about, and I just I'll respond with, well, you grew up in an era where humankind has forgot what money really is.
Yeah.
When you invest, you are taking a risk. And for
Yeah.
that risk, you get a return. But
Yes.
capitalism, if I was to summarize it really tightly, would be the formation of capital, savings. You take that formation of capital, and if you are a good risk taker, you can invest it in something, a business, another, some other enterprise. You get a return for your investment. If you invest it poorly, you lose it.
Yeah.
But the idea with capitalism is the formation of capital. And we have forgot that that is the basis of capitalism because our money has been so manipulated and bastardized. So now we are returning to the era where we can focus on the formation of capital that preserves its own purchasing power just by being money.
Yeah.
Whereas you and I, like I'm born in the early 70s, you're born much later, but
Early 90s.
we've grown up in the era of the fiat dollar. So nobody has sat around thinking, oh my gosh, Rajat, Tom, you guys should just form capital and sit on it and wait until you invested in something that will get you a yield or a return. It was always like, oh my gosh, if you just have a little bit of money, you better invest it or it's going to lose purchasing power. So the
Yeah.
focus became on the yield and not the formation of capital. We are now returning to humankind having a pure form of money, whereas gold was maybe the last one, I could argue. And that's going to focus the attention back on forming pools of capital again. So when someone asks me that question, I'm saying, well, you're just looking for yield because the dollars that you've kept in your pocket or savings account lose value over the time. And you consciously or unconsciously know that. So you're forced to look for yield. Whereas now we have a form of money that continues to go up in value day after day and year over time. So now you don't have to invest. You don't have to take the risk of looking for yield. You can literally just save, offer value
Yeah.
to the economy, offer value to the marketplace, get money in return, and you can save it and wait for something that you really are passionate about and you want to invest in, and then look for a
Wow.
yield if you want. But in the meantime, you can just form capital bases and your purchasing power will be protected. We haven't had
See,
that.
that's your thesis right there. Right.
Mm.
That's what your that's your main. I think that's your main argument for Bitcoin. I think you said that so well. Before, I think one of the way that I see it, one of the issues with fake money, pieces of paper, pieces of plastic as money, is that over time we've moved further and further away from savings, and we've turned it more and more into just blindly buying the S&P 500 or blindly buying any property that comes to market because we know for a fact that over time, because the pieces of paper are going to lose value, we know for a fact that this property is going to increase in value. I feel like that's being flipped, like completely just turned around. Because before, I like to say this, before the money was easier to create than the houses. Now the money is harder to create than the houses. So the houses are going to lose value. The money is going to increase in value.
Love it. And I love it. And what it allows all of us to do is to live expressing our unique talents to the world as we want to, instead of being forced into careers to make the most money possible to survive. Because
Yeah.
if my savings go up in value, I've said this before, you can be the artist, you can be the
Yeah.
poet, you
Yeah.
can be the architect, be the builder, be the real estate, be whatever you want to be, but you can chase that dream out of a base of passion and interest and self-exploration instead of chasing it out of fear and debt and being cornered into a life that you don't want.
Yeah.
It actually is a very freeing thing to have a form of money that cannot be diluted. And
Yeah.
if that happens to each of us around the world globally, what kind of communities does that produce around the world? Where Rajat, you get to do what you want to do because you can save the money and it goes up in value. You can smile, you can laugh. We can go have coffee together and joke around and poke fun of each other. I can explain to you why the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup this year. We can debate that for 6 hours and have some fun with it.
Yeah.
Instead, everyone's running around in circles trying to make the most money possible because they have to, because the dollars lose value.
Yeah.
It's just completely backwards. But the
Yeah.
future is bright.
Absolutely, I completely agree. The future is bright. I want to ask you one question that I ask every single. That was so valuable. I'm gonna have to go through this recording over and over again just to listen to everything we've said. I think I came up with some things that I've never even thought of before. Pretty sure you did as well. Like this is
Awesome.
amazing. But I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests here. The question is, what do you think is the most important downstream effect of Bitcoin? So let's say 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
That every child is free to express themselves as they see fit.
Wow.
That we don't, we, that
Yeah.
like we're not forced into roles that nobody wants.
Yeah.
Like that a world can be really free. Like, I guess it sounds too ideal. Like, I guess I sound too pie in the sky, but I don't know. I believe it. Like that is the downstream effect. Prices fall, energy comes down, the value of a government central authority telling us what the price of money should be by a couple people coming out once a month to tell us what interest rates are. I think in history, this era is going to be literally laughed at. Like, I think history 100 years from now will look back at this era and say, wait a second, let me get this straight. I'll tell you a funny joke. These people in this era, they waited. There was a bunch of people who could just print money while other people had to work for it. And the people who got to print money also got to set the price of it. Like, I think it'll just be laughed at. And I think the
Yeah.
world going forward, I really think the launch of Bitcoin was an inflection point of humanity that is going to go down in history of as one of the most important and most beautiful things ever to happen to us.
Wow. Yeah. I completely agree. Can you imagine how many people aren't going to be working in, let's say, finance, creating more
Oh,
money? All those people, like all those a lot of those people are really smart. Like I've worked with a lot of people who were
yeah,
in finance. They know like they're great with computers, they're great with engineering. There are people in different fields, right? And they're all wasting their time, energy, resources on creating more money in a fake system that can print more money out of thin air. All those people, they're going to be contributing their energy, their time, their resources to building better houses, to building faster cars, more beautiful buildings, and just completely changing the world, turning everything upside down.
agreed. Yeah, I know we sound maybe too pie in the sky, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you 100%. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. This on Tom, that was a great conversation. I really enjoyed that. I want to ask you one last question here. What are your tips for people who, let's say, for example, they're studying Bitcoin for the first time? What are your tips for them?
I guess it would be to understand that there's a network and an asset that are intermingled together in a way
Mm,
that has never been formed before. So don't just look at Bitcoin through a financial lens of price and trends and pullbacks and the fiat US dollar price or Canadian dollar price of it. Try to understand a little bit of how the network works, how mining works, how nodes work. There's a great book called The Block Size War that goes
mm,
through some of what happened, in the late, I think it's like
2017.
2017. Is that it? 20, I was going to say 2016, 2017 era. Understand some of the technology, even if that doesn't come naturally to you, because if you understand the technology, then when someone says to you, oh, well, the government will shut it down, or like, oh, like, well, the amount of Bitcoins can just be changed, you'll understand why these people are wrong. And then when you have that type of understanding yourself, it just gives you another lens through which to look at the price. So I would highly recommend understand the technology. Actually, a couple of books written by Andreas Antonopoulos really
Oh
helped me
yeah.
out early. They were colored
Oh,
books. Like one was
I have one
purple and,
behind me.
oh, do
The
you?
internet. I
Okay.
don't know if you can see it. The Internet of
I
Money.
can't. I can't in that. Yeah. Okay.
You can
Okay.
see it in
Got it.
my
Those.
other videos. Yeah, great
Okay.
book.
Those books really helped me
Yeah.
out. So I would take a stab at understanding the technology, because if you just come at it from the economic angle, maybe you're missing like half the story here. So maybe I ought to take that approach. It's tough though. You got to spend a lot of time. It's a lot. We
Yeah.
both know it takes time. I laughed at it. Like, I laughed at it. And I think in 2017, 18, like I was talking about blockchain is the way, like not Bitcoin. like I was totally backwards.
Yeah.
So take some
Yeah.
time. Be patient. Be patient.
It's true. Put in the time, and I think this is going to pay off regardless. Like
Agreed.
for me, I've been trying to study this for 3, almost 4 years. I feel like it's finally starting to pay off because I had basically my entire business is based on Bitcoin now. It's focused on Bitcoin,
Awesome.
educating people on Bitcoin, right? And it's finally starting to pay off because it feels like more and more people are starting to look for it. More and more people are wanting to learn what this thing is and where it could go. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome.
Tom, last thing here, plug yourself. Where can people find you?
I guess, yeah, sure. Thank you. I guess our business best URL would be rockstarinnercircle.com. I'm on
Amazing.
Twitter, just at Tom Karazda, those kind of places.
Perfect. I'll link your Twitter in the description so people can find you.
Cool.
I think this was a great conversation, Tom. I really, really appreciate your time here.
Rajat, thank you. Always a pleasure to chat with you. Love it.